Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, guys.
It's a little quiet for me.
Yeah.
You're right, Kasia.
Can you make it a little louder?
Is it
Jitka?
better now?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. It's time for the second of the winners of the PTNCE prize that is giving a key speech today to talk. So I'll turn things over to Professor Koszycka once again to introduce our second key speaker for today.
Hello, everyone. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, so hello again. On behalf of the Polish Society for Human and Evolution Studies Award Committee, it is my great honor to announce that on January 15th, 2021, the committee chose Dr. Jitka Fialová as the 2020 winner of the Professor Jan Strzałko Award for Outstanding Young Scientist. Dr. Jitka Fialová is a human ethologist and behavioral scientist, currently affiliated at the Faculty of Science, Charles University in Prague, Czech Republic. She completed her PhD in 2017 in theoretical and evolutionary biology at the Faculty of Science, Charles University, under the supervision of Jan Havlicek. Her research interests primarily concern the social and environmental aspects of chemical communication in humans. And as a part of the prize, Dr. Jitka Fialová receives a diploma of recognition from the society. Many congratulations. And Dr. Fialová will now deliver a special lecture in which she will present the account of her scientific achievements. Jitka, the stage is yours.
So thank you very much. I am really honored to receive this prize and to join our great awardees of this prize. So thank you very much. It's really great. To begin with, the topic of my talk will be perception of intra-individual variation in human body odor quality. At first, I would like to say a few words about why we are investigating body odor and smell and so on. It's because it's important in various aspects of our life. It can help us to avoid danger, to avoid pathogens or some spoiled food, but it also can help us to search for good food. Another thing is that it works in various social relationships and in some self-inspection and other inspection behavior. Although we don't talk about it very much, it seems quite often, smell others, smell our clothing to check whether it's still okay or it's not, or sometimes to comfort ourselves. And as I said, body odor is important in various social interactions, including mother-infant relationship, or, for example, mate choice. Body odor, what are the origins? Our body is covered with various skin glands. They are called eccrine, apocrine, and sebaceous. And these glands produce secretion. But the secretion is virtually odorless, and it gets its typical body odor smell only after metabolizing by our skin microflora. So our body odor has some genetic basis. We have several lines of evidence of that. It was, for example, shown that relatives who have more similar genes have also more similar body odor. Similarly, this odor of monozygotic twins is more similar than body odor of dizygotic twins. Another line of evidence, which is focused on genes of major histocompatibility complex, shows that these genes that are part of our immune system and they are responsible for recognizing foreign antigens, they also seem to be reflected in our body odor and play a role in mate preferences. But there is also substantial intra and inter-individual variation in our body odor. There are various intrinsic and extrinsic factors that affect it. For example, it's our health status. There are changes during women's menstrual cycles, probably due to different hormone levels. There is also effect of various affective states. For example, people who feel stressed or anxious smell worse than when they are in neutral condition. And also these body odors can affect others who are exposed to them. They can increase their anxiety or induce some affective cognitive changes. And also there is a diet, which is by many considered as one of the most important environmental factors that affect our body odor. So at first, for those who are not very familiar with body odor studies, I would like to say a few words about how they are conducted, how these samples are collected. At first, there are 2 days of, we call it diet, and it means that we ask our participants to avoid spicy food, to avoid using deodorants, perfumes, washing with perfume soap, not to drink alcohol, smoke, don't do any exercises, sex, sleep with their partner or their pet in a bed. So after these 2 days of diet, there is collection of body odor. At first, they wash their armpits with non-perfume soap, and then they apply a cotton pad into their armpit and fix it there with surgical tape. And then the collection of body odor begins. It's usually about 12 hours, but it depends on the specific study. And when we obtain these body odor samples, they are rated by our invited raters, very often regarding their pleasantness, attractiveness, intensity, and so on. So that's how our body odor studies are done in general. And it applies to majority of studies I will introduce today with some small changes. So the first study I would like to mention is focused on the relationship between body odor and immune system. And we collaborated on this one with Dáša Švambergová, Žaneta Slámová, and Jan Havlíček. But also with our Polish colleagues. Many of them are here. Today, due to time restrictions, I will present only the part read, but I, of course, recommend to you to look at the whole paper. So what we know so far is that facial attractiveness is connected with immune response. There are studies showing that men who had higher antibodies after vaccination against hepatitis B were rated more attractive. And also there were positive association between facial attractiveness, health, and elevated levels of cytokines. Regarding body odor, we have some studies about the health status. We know that current health status or sickness affect body odor negatively. It was, for example, shown in a study where men were injected by lipopolysaccharide. It's a bacterial endotoxin, and their body odor was afterwards rated as more aversive. And we have similar results from naturally occurring sickness. So the aim of our study was to investigate whether there is any association between functioning of immune system and our body odor quality. To this aim, we collected body odor samples from male donors. We also obtained blood samples to analyze their antibodies levels, and then they were vaccinated against hepatitis A, B, and meningococcus. We chose vaccines against both viral and bacterial infections to stimulate a broader spectrum of the immune system. And after 30 days from the vaccination, we collected another blood samples for analyzing differences in antibodies levels. The collected samples were rated regarding their attractiveness, healthiness, and intensity. And when we look at the results, we can see that none of the antibodies levels predicted rated body odor characteristics. Neither attractiveness, intensity, healthiness were affected by antibodies against hepatitis A and meningococcus levels. We also tested some possible modulating factors such as cortisol, testosterone levels, and BMI. From previous studies, we know that these hormones seem to be connected with our body odor, and they also modulate our immune response as well as BMI. But we didn't find any effect of these factors on antibodies levels. So from our study, it seems that there is no association between body odor and immune response. But there are some differences between facial perception studies. The one is that we couldn't use antibodies against hepatitis A because some of our participants had already high levels at the beginning of the study, even though we asked them to participate only if they were not vaccinated at least 10 years before the study. But it seems maybe some of them were not aware of the vaccination, or they already had, or they still had higher antibodies, even the vaccination took place longer time ago. And also some of them didn't respond on vaccination, so there were not difference between antibodies before and after. So we didn't use them, and these are exactly the antibodies that were shown in a Rantalas study to have association with facial attractiveness. Also, we used as a measure of immune quality the immune responsiveness, which is quite a crude measure because we saw that when the response is higher, the immune system is better. But it's quite crude and simplifying because sometimes it's not adaptive to have a high response or in different directions. Sometimes it's better to have only a small reaction. It depends on the conditions. But now currently it seems that body odor is a very nice cue to more current and more dynamic status like current health. So, as I already mentioned, one of the important factors that causes variation in body odor is food we eat. And so we conducted a study focused on food with Craig Roberts and Jan Havlicek. And we specifically investigated the effect of garlic on our body odor. We know about garlic that it has many beneficial health properties, including immunostimulant, cardiovascular, it's effective against some kinds of cancer, it has antibacterial properties, and so on. But it has one quite distinct adverse effect, which is its distinctive smell. And it was already shown that it affects the odor of amniotic fluid and breast milk, and that children react on these smells. But in general, there was already one study investigating the effect of food, which was focused on meat consumption, and it was shown that when you eat larger quantities of meat, your body odor is less pleasant, less attractive, and more intense. So based on this evidence, we investigated the effect of garlic consumption on axillary odor. To test this, we divided our odor donors in half. One half of them they ate a slice of bread with 6 grams of crushed garlic, which are approximately 2 cloves of garlic, mixed with fresh cheese. And in the control group, they ate only a slice of bread with fresh cheese, and 1 week later, the groups were switched. After this dinner, they collected body odor samples during the night, and these samples were rated regarding the pleasantness, attractiveness, masculinity, and intensity. And when we looked at the results, we didn't find any difference between samples collected during experimental and control conditions, which felt rather weird. And we thought that the reason could be due to insufficient quantity of garlic. So in the follow-up study, we doubled the quantity of garlic to 12 grams of garlic, which is approximately 4 cloves. And also to investigate the nature of garlic that people eat, we used garlic capsules with soybean oil in the quantity which was approximately these 12 grams of garlic. And in the control group, participants received only capsules with soybean oil. When we looked at the results, we found out that there were finally differences between garlic and control condition, but surprisingly in the other way. So when people ate garlic, their body odor was more pleasant, more attractive, less masculine, and less intense. And we can see similar picture also for garlic capsules. People were rated more attractive and less masculine, less intense when they consumed them. So at first, these results were quite confusing and surprising for us, but we think that the explanation could lie in the health benefits of garlic because of its antioxidant properties, because garlic is active against various reactive oxygen species, and also it has antibacterial properties, and it could affect the amount of bacteria in our armpits, maybe in general or in a strain fashion way. Also, this theory is in line with the theories of quality of potential partner, as garlic can be viewed as a high quality food due to its health benefits. The better smell could point to a healthier partner with access to good food. On the other hand, we can't forget that garlic affects quite distinctly our breath odor, as I think we all know, and that breath odor would be more important in various social interactions than axillary odor. So there are many foods that we can investigate for many years. So we decided to take more general approach and look at the effect of diet quality and diet quantity on our body odor. On the study, we cooperated with Rudolf Hoffman, Craig Roberts, and Jan Havlicek, and we investigated the effect of complete caloric intake restriction on our body odor. We know from animal studies that diet quality affects body odor in rodents. For example, those fed with high protein diet were more attractive for the opposite sex individuals, but on the other hand, those who were food deprived were less attractive. And we wanted to see whether we can find similar effect also in humans, whether complete caloric intake restriction will affect our odor negatively. So we collected body samples from our female donors 3 times, once during their habitual food regime, then after 2 days of complete caloric intake restriction when they were allowed only to drink plain water, and then 3 days after caloric intake restoration. to check whether our intervention worked and whether there are changes as a consequence of fasting. We measured some physiological indicators like glucose levels, potassium, albumin, cholesterol, and so on, which should be connected to fasting. We also took some anthropometric measurements like height, weight, circumference of breast, waist, hips, body composition. And as we know that the body odor that affective states affect our body odor, and we were suspicious that fasting could cause some of these changes, they also filled in questionnaires regarding their affective states. Then these samples were rated regarding their pleasantness, attractiveness, femininity, and intensity. And on these figures, we can see that our intervention seemed successful, that physiological markers changed in the expected way. But when we look at the results of body odor rating, there were no expected negative changes in body odor due to the fasting. But on the other hand, we found positive effect of restoration of caloric intake. So these samples after 3 days of restoration were rated as more pleasant, more attractive, and less intense as compared to baseline period and to fasting period. Along with these results, we also found lower positive mood during fasting, which is not surprising. Also, we found lower caloric intake during the restoration phase. And due to fasting, our participants had lower weight, lower breast circumference, and lower waist to hip ratio. So why we didn't find a negative effect of fasting? It could be due to the fact that fasting period wasn't long enough. The studies on rodents also used 2 days, but their metabolism is much faster, so it's much more demanding for them than for humans, even though you may be not convinced by this. But why we found a positive effect of restoration of caloric intake, it could be due to slightly different diet composition, because we recommended our older donors to eat more healthy, more light food to avoid some digestive problems. So it could be due to different diet composition, but also there was lower caloric intake. And there are studies showing that it's connected with longevity, with better health, as well as alternate day fasting regimes. Main limitation of the study is, of course, our sample size, but it was quite challenging to persuade people to participate in this rather interesting study. So we had only these numbers. But on the other hand, this sample size was large enough to detect some of the effects, and we use within subject design, which should be more sensitive even to small changes. Of course, this is a really interesting topic, but I think that in future it would be better, for example, to investigate it only different levels of caloric intake, only to decrease the caloric intake and not restrict it at all. Or we could have a look at the effect of major nutrition groups like proteins or carbohydrates and so on. So another interesting factor that is affecting our body odor was shown to be dominant, competition, and aggression. And so we looked at these effects with Vít Třebíčský, Radim Kuba, David Stella, Jakub Benter, and Jan Havlíček. And we investigated the effect of competition and its outcome on our body odor quality. From previous studies, we know that in our body odor there are some cues to psychological dominance, and that men who are more dominant are preferred by females in their fertile phase of the menstrual cycle. Also, previous studies show that samples that were collected during competition, body odor samples, exhibited stronger skin conductance response in those who were exposed to it. And skin conductance response measures the response on some significant stimuli. Also, when people were exposed to aggressive odor that were collected during some boxing session, it induced some affective and cognitive changes. So based on this evidence, we decided to investigate whether there is any effect of winning and losing on body odor and the competition in general. So to this cause, we collected data from mixed martial arts fighters. We chose this sport because it's very physically demanding, it's very competitive, and we think that it resembles to real-life competition because it takes place in stands on the ground, and it's resembling to real-life competition or real-life fights. So we collected these samples on 4 rounds of Czech Amateur MMA League. Fighters also filled in some questionnaires regarding their affective state. We collected blood samples from their fingers, capillary blood samples, to analyze their hormone levels before and after the fight. We opted for capillary blood because we thought that if we use saliva, that after fight there could be some blood which would affect our results. So that's the reason. And of course, we recorded the result of the fight. All these procedures took place twice, once approximately 1 hour before the fight, and the second time immediately after the fight. And this time we sampled body odor samples on cotton t-shirts for half an hour. So when these odor samples were rated, we found out that after the fight, after the competition, their body odor was rated as less pleasant, less attractive, and less intense, and more masculine. When we look at the effect of winning and losing, the only significant effect was only regarding the pleasantness, showing that those who lost the fight was rated as less pleasant. We also looked at some modulating factors such as affective states and hormone levels. We didn't use testosterone levels because there was no change before and after the competition. So the model included only positive and negative affective states and cortisol levels. And it showed that losing has a negative effect on our mood, and that the negative mood negatively affects the odor attractiveness. So to sum up this study, we found out that pleasantness, attractiveness, and intensity decreased, and masculinity increased as a result of undergoing match. Also, the pleasantness was lower in losers. And it seems that these differences are not due to some previous differences between these winners and losers, because at the beginning their body odor was rated similarly. Perhaps not surprisingly, winners had better mood and losers had worse mood, which seemed to decrease also the odor attractiveness. There is interesting question about the ecological validity of this study, which is quite higher than in majority of our studies. As I told you at the beginning about this donor's diet, we didn't do it in this case because we got access to the fighters only a few hours before the fight, so we couldn't ask them to follow these instructions. So they ate whatever they wanted. They used perfumes, deodorants, and so on. So it would be, and due to this, there could be some effects that we didn't observe due to this noise in the data. But on the other hand, it's more ecologically valid. Still, we think that this should be investigated in more standardized environment, which is what we are currently doing. So I hope I convinced you now that our body odor is important. It provides many useful clues to others' states, dynamic and stable. But you can say that we all use perfumes and deodorants and so on, and that they can mask this information. So you are right, and we looked at the selection of perfumes, how we select them, together with Markéta Gvužďová, Craig Roberts, and Havlicek. But we wanted to investigate the effect of biological relatedness in perfume choice. I will tell you more. Of course, as I said, there is cross-cultural and historical evidence of fragrance use. It's really widespread. And it was thought that these fragrances only mask our body odor, that we can smell the natural body odor once we apply them. But studies show that there seems to be interaction between axillary odor and perfume. They don't simply mask them. And I think that you have similar experience that your friend has very nice perfume, it smells really great, and when you use it, it's not so good. So you can see that there is some interaction between your natural body odor. And also studies show that there is individual nature of perfume choice. That when you use perfume that you yourself selected, it smells on you much better than when you use some random perfume. Moreover, as I already said at the beginning, relatives seem to share some similarities in body odor. And in light of this, we decided to investigate whether there is some advantage of being biologically related in perfume choice, because we expected that if you are related, you have more similar body odor, and you will be able to select perfumes for your relatives better than someone unrelated. So we expected that the individual who selected the perfume for himself and his relative would be similarly successful in resulting attractiveness more than someone who is not related to this person. To test this, we performed 2 studies. In one of them, there were male donors and their partners as non-relatives. And in the second one, there were males and their sisters as biological relatives. These mixtures, which I will explain how we got to them, were rated by females in both studies, and also the perfumes themselves were rated to check whether maybe there is some perfume in the selection which is much better than others and which could cause the effect. On perfume choice, we collaborated with professional perfumers, and at the end there were 6 main categories of perfumes: fougere, woody, aquatic, citrus, oriental, and aromatic. And in each of these categories there were 4 perfumes. One of them was mine, representing the category, and then 3 others that were similar but different. And we developed 2-step selection process, because if people were asked to smell all these perfumes, there would be quite quick habituation and they would get tired. So in the first step, they were asked to select 2 perfumes representing the main category from these 6. And in the second step, they were presented with 4 perfumes from each category they selected at the beginning, so that was 8 perfumes, and they were asked to select one of them, the best one, to suit them or to a partner or to the brother. Then men applied these perfumes into their armpits. In one armpit, perfume they selected themselves, and into the other armpit, the perfume selected by partner or sister, depending on the study. And then these mixtures were rated regarding the pleasantness, attractiveness, masculinity, and intensity. And when we look at the results, we can see that there was no difference between ratings of perfumes that were selected by men themselves and their partners. And on the right side, you can see that there was no difference between ratings of perfumes alone. Results of selection by target men and their sisters are quite different. The attractiveness of body odor was, or the mixture of body odor and perfume was higher when it was selected by sisters. So, firstly, we expected that men will be the most successful in selecting perfumes for themselves, which wasn't the case. It seems that women were better in this. And why is that? One of the reasons could be because we asked to participate only men that didn't use perfumes. So it might be that they were not very familiar with perfumes, with selecting them, and so on, and that women have much more experience with that, and they were more successful. Also, in the case of sisters, we could look at the inclusive fitness theorem, which says that when sisters would be tuned to select good perfumes for their brothers, it would increase their reproductive success and increase in time the inclusive fitness. Also, there might be a bit different criteria of selection of perfumes in men and women, because the mixtures were rated only by women, and these mixtures selected by women were also more successful. But maybe if the samples were rated by men, the results could be different. We don't know. But another reason why women were a bit more successful than men could be due to their more complex olfactory abilities, and also maybe they are better in imagining the resulting mixture of body odor and perfume. But there are studies showing that there are no differences between imagination in men and women, so it's rather hard to say. Of course, the best way to conduct this study would be to have men and his sister and his partner, and to directly compare their choices. Unfortunately, we were facing difficulties in recruiting these trials, so we decided to divide the study into one with sisters, one with partners. But of course, it would be great to compare partners and sisters directly. So, to sum up, we can see from these studies that our odors are partly characterized by genetic influences, but to some extent can be changed by various intrinsic and extrinsic factors. We usually talk about these factors separately from each other for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of some kind of sensible testing. But we should be aware of that there is always interaction between these factors. For example, in the case of diet, we can look at the example of various metabolic diseases. When the body is not able to metabolize certain compounds, it could lead to accumulation of certain metabolites from food, and it could lead to peculiar smells, such as in the case of maple syrup disease, phenethylaminiuria, or diabetes. For example, diabetic people smell rather sweetly. But some of these conditions can be altered by the proper diet. So we can see that although we expect that everybody is reacting similarly, there are of course differences due to their genetic backgrounds. There are of course some limitations to these body odor studies in general. We are usually focused only on axillary odor because it is thought that it has main communicative function in humans because of bipedy and because it's quite a nice environment for bacteria to metabolize the secretion from glands. But currently we don't know whether there is a correlation between the odor from various body sites and whether maybe various body sites provide different information about the individual. Also, in many cases, we don't know mechanisms of changes of body odor. For example, in the case of food, it is thought that some changes could be due to direct excretion of some aromatic compounds, but it could be also more indirect ways through metabolization in liver and other metabolic processes. But in majority of cases, we don't know what's more probable or how it works. Another important thing is that we don't know what chemicals are behind these changes and what chemicals are responsible for our body odor. It's changing nowadays, fortunately. Many studies that are conducted today also involve analysis of microflora and chemical analysis. So it's changing, but still we don't know many things. And of course, many of the studies, or majority of the studies, are conducted not only on weird societies, but also on odd societies, which is quite a nice term, which was brought up by Jan, Craig, and Benoit Shaw, and it means on old, deodorized, and desensitized people, which means that old are not really old, but they are adults, and that the research quite omits babies and infants. Deodorized means that we are trying to get rid of our natural body odor and we are using various fragrances. And desensitized means that our smell is not so good as in other ethnics. It was shown repeatedly that other ethnics, like for example Onjis, who have a whole of their cosmology based on olfaction and body odors, like that they orient in their work based on body odors. So in many societies, people have a better sense of smell. It could have several reasons. It's because they are exposed to more chemicals, more aromatic substances. There are more fragrances. There are more smells around. So they are more trained to them. But also it could be also due to pollution. It was shown repeatedly that smell of people in big polluted cities is much worse than, for example, on the countryside. So I think that it's all for me for today, and thank you for the attention. And I would like to also thank to our human ethology lab for the support and for the fun we had during the years, leading, of course, with Jan Havicek, and of course, special thank goes to Jitka Fialová.
Great, thank you very much, Jitka. All right, so it's question time, and I can see already have one question from Peter. Peter, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for your great talk. I really like the mixed martial arts study, in that there's a kind of a loser effect, right? So that losers smell like losers. But this seems to be, and it obviously probably has implications for people's social and romantic lives, etc. But this is a trait measure, and I'm wondering if there's a kind of a state, I'm sorry, this was a state measure, but I'm wondering if being a loser as a trait might be something you can detect, and it might be a kind of mediating mechanism that maybe facilitates inability to find romantic partners and a variety of other things. I don't know exactly how to measure being a loser as a trait, but I'd like to hear your thoughts at least.
Well, I also don't know how to measure whether someone is loser or not. I think it would be a combination of many factors. Well, that's a real question, because it seems in many studies that body odor could be better cued to some dynamic states more than stable. But well, it's possible if someone, maybe I would say, is unlucky during majority of his life, he could feel depressed, he could feel anxious, and as we know from the studies on affective states, he could have worse body odor. Yes.
I mean, if I go through my life like constantly losing, doesn't it make reasonable sense that my normal body odor would shift in accordance with that recurrent phenomena of just, I'm always losing. You know, I don't get the job I want, I don't get the girl I want.
Yes, I would guess it would, but it's really so hard to say.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions, please? Kasia.
Hi, Jitka, great talk.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, but maybe I'll just ask one because someone will think of something in between. And it actually just was inspired by Peter's comment and what you said about the difference between dynamic and static cues, which we know, whether it's the voice or smell, they differ. And I wonder whether there are studies looking at whether there is stability in more static cues of body scent. So whether you are sort of born with your smell and how that changes in ontogeny, whether there is like an individual marker of smell, which I think there is, and how that interacts with people's preferences.
So I would say that there are some stable genetic bases. As I said, that the relatives are more similar in body odor. It seems to be based on their genes and not on their environment, because even though they share usually similar food, similar homes, and so on, this doesn't seem to be the case, because there are studies on spouses who usually are not genetically related, but they share the environment, and people couldn't match their body odor samples together.
Okay.
So it seems that the environment has some influences, but they can't be so strong to overcome some genetic basis.
Okay. Sorry, I think I missed that part.
Sorry.
Go on. Sorry, I think I missed that part of your talk. Sorry.
Oh, I didn't say this about spouses. So
Okay.
And so it seems that it should be somehow stable, but there are, of course, not of course, but it seems there are changes during ontogeny. That, for example, around puberty, the apocrine glands begin to function. They are not functioning before, but they begin during the puberty, and their activity then again decreases around menopause. So there should be some differences. There are also some studies looking at the effect of age on body odor, and there are only 2 or 3 I'm aware of, and they have quite different results. Usually it comes out that children and babies have best smell. Then also women's smell is usually rated as better than males. But then one study showed that older people around I don't know, 60, 70 have better smell, because it seems to be less intense on the one hand, but another study showed that it was rated as less pleasant, and there was also identified some chemicals behind it, which other studies didn't confirm, so we don't know exactly.
But do you know if there's any longitudinal studies that have measured, that have taken smell samples from the same individual, say, at, 1 year of life, 5 years of life, to see, and maybe did a chemical analysis to see whether, rather than looking at the genetics, but directly measuring the chemical composition at different ages of the same individual?
I don't think so. Okay. In general, it's quite challenging to get people to participate in these body odor studies and to donate their body odor. So to make a longitudinal study, it's really a problem.
Yeah, voice recording is easier. Okay, thank you. I have another question, but I'll wait to see if someone else has one.
No, there's no other questions right now, so please go ahead.
Okay, so my other question is about sensory experience. So something that we've studied, many people have studied with blind individuals and deaf individuals to see how a lack of experience in that modality affects your perception of the voice or visual cues in the face. And I wonder if there's any research on smellers' point of view, how they learn their preferences and whether there's any sensory experience sort of designs their preferences, or whether you think that these are also genetic, the actual, from the smeller's point of view.
Well, there are certainly culturally derived differences in perception. As I already mentioned, that even amniotic fluid and breast milk is affected, for example, by mother's diet, and the baby reacts later on these odors and flavors, and it's usually more positive. So when it encounters the flavor, the smell in utero or during breastfeeding, later it reacts more positively, for example, in terms of mimic expressions, or they are breastfeeding longer and more vigorously. And it seems that some of these food preferences are formed even so early. Then, of course, the child is confronted with other foods later when it gets to normal food and the food that is normal for the culture. So there are definitely some cultural differences, and whether everything is learned or whether we have some innate preferences, we don't know. We already focused also on the possibility of the effect of forming these impressions on body odors based on our trigeminal stimulation, which is the sensation we had when we encounter something with like a freezing effect, like peppermint or stinging and so on. So that's one possibility that could affect our forming of preferences. But also, of course, there are identified some genes that are connected to flavor preferences. I think it's the case of how is it called? Coriander. Okay. Yes. So maybe there are some innate preferences, but we don't know much about it yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I actually have a question myself. And it's really a question that goes beyond what we can do right now. This is just, I was wondering what you think, because I mean, there's obvious reasons to try and isolate the effect of odor. So you take the samples, you only look at the samples, and you get information about the effect of the odor by itself. But of course, in real environments, that's not the case in general. You have odor and a number of other things going on at the same time, kind of like Vit was talking about yesterday. right? Whereas, of course, I mean, she was still pulling these things apart, whereas in real situations, they're all functioning simultaneously and interacting in some ways. So I was really wondering, Jitka, what you think about how that happens, how odor plays a role in the sort of normal world interactions that people have with a number of other modalities going on at the same time.
Well, again, we don't know much about this,
Yes.
but there are some studies that were focused on the integration of different modalities and looking at which can affect or which modality can affect the other. And there are some studies showing that, for example, when people were rating some fearful, or the design was like that there were several faces, some of them were fearful, some of them were neutral, some of them were smiling. And when people were exposed to the odors of some people who were stressed or anxious, they were more readily rating ambiguous faces as fearful. So, or there is another study regarding the smell of disease, when there were pictures of people when they were sick, and also their body odor. And this odor affected the rating again in the direction that people were rating these faces as more sick. But the important thing is that these odors quite often don't affect you on the conscious level. That you don't need to smell the odor itself. You don't know what's the quality, or even you don't know whether it's there or not. But it affects your consecutive behavior, your rating, and so on. But unfortunately, we don't know much about it, but it seems that on unconscious level, odors could really affect what you see or what you perceive.
Right, thank you. Bogusz, you have a question?
Okay, let me just switch it on. Thanks, Jitka, for your great talk. I've got two questions. The first one is that it occurred to me that in small-scale societies or in like traditional societies, people, they've got usually exactly the same diet. Even when I stayed at Yucatan with Mayas at the village, they all ate the same, like squash, beans, chicken, pork, and so on. And therefore, it occurred to me that maybe there was not enough time to construct any pressure on communication through smell related to diet. So maybe right now it's not that relevant in evolutionary evolutionary context. So what do you think about this? And the second question is about the question about possibility that we're missing a lot that is related with semiochemical information that is not consciously received. Like, of course, there is a lot of controversy about pheromones, but they are supposed not to smell, and therefore there should be probably some new studies. But I don't know how to carry out these studies on something that is not kind of consciously receptor, you know, with no conscious description, or so to say, of a smell. So what do you think about this? Thanks a lot.
So regarding your first question, I think that you are right, that there maybe wasn't enough time for selection pressures to evolve some preferences. And we also discussed this in some of our papers, that although I know I mentioned that from the evolutionary point of view, maybe when we eat garlic, we give some cues that we are good foragers. But Of course, we don't know whether there could be some strong and long-standing selection pressure that would evolve these preferences, or whether these differences in body odor quality, for example, after eating some foods, are just byproducts of the metabolism of food. It doesn't really need to have some evolutionary selective function. So I agree. And the second question, it was how to investigate some unconscious
whether we're missing some information that is not consciously analyzed, so to say.
Yeah, possibly we do, but in some studies, fortunately, they don't investigate only these conscious, hedonic perceptions, rating, and so on. But as I mentioned, sometimes there is used skin conductance, which can show you responses to important stimuli. There are, of course, some studies using EEG, fMRI, to showing responses on certain body odors, or there are some cognitive tests measuring fear reaction and so on. So definitely in many studies which are focused only on conscious hedonic perception, we are missing something, but fortunately it's getting better, and studies are involving also other methods, and the studies on olfaction and body odor perception are becoming more and more interdisciplinary.
Okay, thank you very much, Jitka. Thank you for your talk and thank you for your answers. It's now time for